Continuing our lessons on Excel VBA, we will now consider file handling. That is to say, first of all, we will create a file and then write from memory onto our disk, and later on we'll be considering how we can open the file and read back the data. So we'll start off by putting two buttons on the screen, on the sheet, on the Excel workbook. I will rename the buttons, and just so I can distinguish between them at the moment. So this is the name of the button, and with the corresponding caption. I'll just copy that and paste that into the, double click on that and paste it into there, and I've got two buttons which are named. If I double click, of course, then I can start writing my code. It's probably a good idea to create a folder first of all, which I've done here on C drive. I've called it test, so I can write my files into that folder. So I can double click on my button and write some code in there to create a file. So first of all, I'll open a file for output, and we'll be writing to that folder, of course, and this is the name of the file. I really ought to give it an extension as well. Then I want to write the actual data to the file, so I'll write some text to the file, and finally we need to close the file. So you can see we're saving it from memory to disk, and that means we're opening for output from the computer onto the disk as one. Now this thing here is a file handle, and you'll see it. You need to keep the same number consistently throughout your program. So it says write to file number 1, close file number 1, because we said this was our file handle. We call this, we defined as 1. We could have said 2 all the way through. I'll show you how to find the next available file handle in a moment, but for the moment we can just run this code, take the design off, and then create the file. And now if I go to my folder, you can see that it appears here. We could take a look at the file. We could just open that with a notebook, for example. Open with Notepad, I should say. You can take a look at that, and you can see it's simply text. It's a comma delimited file as well, you'll notice, with the commas in between the data, which is text. It's also interesting to take a look at the file as raw data. I'm going to open Visual Studio, but you might like to search on the net to find a hex editor. You can take a look at the file itself in hex format. So I'm going to try and open that file from Visual Studio. I won't really be expecting you to do this part of it, but I'm going to open a file, and then from Visual Studio I'm going to go to C drive, and then find my folder, which is the test, and then I want to now go into that folder and open this, but I'm going to open it as open with a binary editor, and open that, and there's my file. A little bit difficult to see, I guess, so I'll show you an expanded version in a moment, but you might just be able to see that we have here 22, for example. This is hexadecimal, that it means actually 2 16s are 32 plus 2 makes 34. So that represents the decimal number 34. I have explained hexadecimal in the past, and that happens to represent the inverted comma and so on. It's interesting to see the 0D, 0A, they're quite famous really, in a file, which denotes the end of a file. 0D is 13, 0A is 10 in hexadecimal, and they mean carriage return line feed. but at the end of the day it denotes where the file ends. Now you don't have to understand that, but I just thought I'd show you how the file actually looks in memory. Well, when I say in memory, it's from the disk. It's a memory image of what's actually on the disk. So you can imagine that as being your disk, and that's how the data is laid out on your disk. Just as an aside here, you might want to find out what the free file is, the message free file, which is this number here. If you do that, it should give you the value of 1, saying that that's free, and after you've used it, this should give you a value of 2. You can try that yourself. But what I'd like to do now is to write some code to read back the file. So I will go to the other and then command button, and then put in there some text to read back, put in some code to read back our file. Just before I do that, little word of warning that sometimes when we're debugging, we make an error, and halfway through our code, and you'll find that the file doesn't get closed. So sometimes you might find that you need to do this. You need to use this very antiquated instruction, I must say. File 0, close file 0. If you run that, it'll close any open files. File 0 means any open files. Quite strange, really, but that's the way it works. And I do recommend you have that at the ready, just in case your program fails and you're halfway through it, and just press that button to make sure that all files are closed. So now let's take a look and see how we read back our file. We have the code here for reading back. It says we open up for input, so we allocate a file handle to it, and we use that file handle all the way, along with the input to import the values of A, B, and C, and then we'll put those in respective cells. So we'll just try that, and you can see that the data is read back from the file. What happens if we create another file? We'll just change that. We'll change some data, and we'll write to this file. Now, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's going to get added on to the previous file, or it's going to overwrite it? Well, let's find out. We create a file, and if we go into our folder and take a look in the test folder and look at the save a text, you can see that it's overwritten that file. So the new data has overwritten it. So you must be careful when you're doing that. If you make a file again, then it will go over the top of the previous one. Okay, so what about if we want to indeed add to our previous file? Well, we can simply change this to append and then run that. And then take a look at our file. And you'll see indeed that we have appended data to the previous set of data. Well, what if we don't know how many elements there are in the file when we want to read it back? Well, we can use end of file. So we can have a loop to end of file, and then we can loop around and inputting our data just one element at a time, and we might as well just message box out that value for convenience rather than putting it on the spreadsheet, which we could also do as well, of course. So we could just try that. And you see that reads in our file, which we appended, of course. We have 6 elements. And finally, if we wanted to delete our file, we could use kill. So we take a look at our file, which is here at the moment, saver, and then we kill it, and it disappears. Goodbye to our file. This is not the only way that we can create files. We could use the create object in the scripting file object, for example. you could try this. You create an object and then create a text file from that and then write to the file. So we could just try that out and take a look in our folder, and there's our file, which we could double click and will open up in Notepad in this case. And to read it back, we could use code like this, where we're creating our object as well, and so on. So you could just try that out, and that just reads back the text from that file. There are many ways we can create and read files, but these are just two of them. You could just do a search on the net for any other thing, but as long as you understand the principle involved of writing and reading to files.